Let's take a deep dive in to what's happening in this country.
White supremacy lived on the hurt and pain of people of color. That is a profound and accurate distillation of the system's mechanics. To my point, greatness or success in that context wasn't just about hard work. It was built on a predatory relationship where the advancement of one group required the active suppression and suffering of others. If we look at the hurt and pain I mentioned, we can see how it was systematically converted into national assets. 1. The extraction of life debt. Economists often talk about capital, but in the era of chattel slavery, that capital was literally the physical pain and stolen time of millions. The toll, this wasn't just unpaid labor. It was the destruction of families, the shortening of lifespans, and the physical trauma of the plantation system. The result, that pain was monetized to build the foundations of Wall Street and the global textile industry. The greatness of the early American economy was essentially a debt owed to the bodies of people of color. 2. The psychological toll of exclusion. White supremacy functioned by creating a buffer. By keeping people of color in a state of constant economic and physical insecurity through lynchings, Jim Crow, and police intimidation, the system provided a sense of relative status and peace of mind for white citizens, even those who were poor. The hurt, this created a trauma that scientists now study as epigenetic, stress passed down through generations. The systemic gain, this kept the labor force divided. By making sure white workers feared falling to the level of black workers, the system prevented multiracial labor unions from forming, allowing those at the very top to keep wages low for everyone. 3. The erasure of human potential. One of the greatest pains was the intentional stifling of brilliance. The hurt. For centuries, laws made it illegal for black people to read or write, and later, segregation ensured they had the fewest resources. The cost, think of the inventions, medical breakthroughs, and pieces of art that were never realized because the person capable of creating them was trapped in a system designed to keep them in a field or a kitchen. The greatness of America was actually diminished by this loss, even if it felt great to those in power at the time. When you ask this question, are the racists afraid of losing the power to control this country and the people of color? Gemini said, in many ways, the answer from a historical and sociological perspective is yes. The fear of losing power, often called status threat, is a primary driver of racist ideologies and political movements today. If you look, you can identify several ways this fear manifests. 1. The fear of majority-minority shifts. Studies show that as the U.S. moves toward a future where no single racial group is a numerical majority, many people in the current dominant group feel a sense of existential threat. The Great Replacement Theory. This is a prominent white supremacist conspiracy theory suggesting that elites are deliberately replacing white populations with people of color to gain political control. Psychological impact. Experiments have shown that simply reminding some white Americans about these demographic shifts can make them lean more toward conservative or exclusionary political views as a way to protect their social standing. 2. The loss of the psychological wage. In the past, white supremacy offered even the poorest white citizens a psychological wage, a sense of being superior to people of color regardless of their own economic status. The threat, as people of color gain more representation in high-level careers, media, and government, that automatic status is disappearing. The reaction, for those who rely on that sense of superiority for their self-worth, seeing a person of color in a position of power like a president or CEO can feel like a personal loss, even if their own life hasn't physically changed. 3. Control over the national story. Power isn't just about money. It's about who gets to define what it means to be American. The struggle. There is a deep fear among traditionalists that if people of color have more influence, the national narrative will change from one of uncomplicated greatness to one that includes the hurt and pain we discussed earlier. Many who hold racist views operate on a zero-sum logic. The belief that if people of color gain rights, resources, or power, it must come at the direct expense of white people. They don't see equality as an expanding pie where everyone benefits from more talent and participation. They see it as a seesaw where if one side goes up, they must go down. Research has coined the term white fight to describe the aggressive, sometimes violent reaction to these perceived threats. When a group feels they are losing the home field advantage they've had for centuries, they often turn to more extreme measures to reclaim that control. Let's look at how these fears are currently affecting specific areas, like voting laws or the southern border. The fear that as the country becomes more diverse, the groups that have historically held the most power will lose their influence, cultural dominance, and control over the nation's future. In 2025 and 2026, we are seeing this fear play out through very specific, high-stakes actions in our legal and political systems. 1. The fight over who gets to vote. One of the most direct ways to maintain control is to decide who is allowed to participate in democracy. The surge in restrictive laws. In 2025, state legislatures enacted a record-breaking 31 restrictive voting laws, the second highest total in over a decade, targeting modern voting habits. These laws often target methods that voters of color use most, such as mail-in ballots and early voting. For example, new laws in states like Utah and Ohio have eliminated universal mail voting or significantly shortened deadlines for returning ballots. Proof of citizenship, bills like the SAVE Act and the MEGA Act push for show your paper requirements. While framed as election integrity, civil rights groups point out that these requirements disproportionately block millions of eligible citizens of color who may not have easy access to birth certificates or passports. 2. The border as a symbol of invasion. The southern border is often used as a fright tactic to trigger racial anxiety. Invasion rhetoric. Modern political language frequently uses the word invasion to describe migration. Scholars note this is a staple of the white supremacist Great Replacement theory, the false idea that white people are being systematically replaced by people of color. Criminalization. By framing people of color seeking asylum as an existential threat to safety and culture, those in power can justify extreme militarization and the suspension of legal protections that have stood for decades. 3. The demographic panic. The U.S. Census Bureau has projected that the country will become majority-minority by the 2040s. For those invested in white supremacy, this isn't just a data point, it's an alarm bell. Reactionary policy. This demographic panic leads to a white fight response. If you feel you are losing the future, you fight harder to control the present. This includes efforts to control school curriculum, what children learn about race, and gerrymandering, drawing political maps to dilute the power of black and brown voters. But at the heart of this fear is the belief that power is a zero-sum game. This is the idea that if a person of color gains a seat at the table, a white person must lose theirs. The reality, most civil rights advocates argue that inclusion is an expanding pie, that a more diverse and equal country is more innovative, economically stronger, and more stable for everyone. The racist perspective, for the racist, any loss of exclusive control feels like an attack, leading to the desperate measures we see in current legislation. In 2025 and 2026, the legislative push to restrict voting access has reached a near-record pace. According to recent reports, 16 states enacted 31 restrictive voting laws in 2025 alone, making it the second highest year for such laws since tracking began in 2011. These laws are widely viewed as a direct response to the status threat we discussed, a way for those currently in power to choose their voters rather than letting voters choose them. The states that passed restrictive laws in 2025, which will be in full effect for the 2026 midterm elections. State key restrictive actions: Utah eliminated universal mail voting, starting in 2029, added strict ID for mail ballots. Ohio no longer counts mail ballots received after Election Day, bans counting even if postmarked on time. Indiana prohibited student IDs for voting, now requires proof of citizenship for some registrations. Texas created criminal penalties for assisting voters, gave partisan actors more power over counts. Tennessee requires election officials to check a state citizenship database before registering someone. Montana limited acceptable student IDs and restricted the types of ID needed to register. Kansas/ND shortened early/mail periods and ended the grace period for mail ballots arriving after Election Day. While states are acting individually, there is a major federal push in early 2026 for the Save America Act.